Back. Welcome to Mike Nice Talk of the Talk. If you just missed it, I had a young couple. I had Michael and I had Jasmine on from my school, and they are getting married July 14, 2012. So we're talking about marriage life and what it's like being young, beautiful, and in love. So I wish them the best of luck. Now I have the Connecticut network to abolish the death penalty in Connecticut. I have two of the members. I have the executive director.
Mm-hmm.
I have Ben Jones, and I have Dr. Albert, Dr. Albert Monroe. Sorry about that. I have you guys on. Thank you guys for coming on. How was you, before we start, how was Thanksgiving turkey?
It's good.
It's good? Are you guys still stuffed? I know it's been a week, but you guys are still stuffed, or?
Yeah, I'm definitely still stuffed.
Okay. Well, that's good. Well, let's get right to it. This is really a controversy issue. It's really serious. That's, throughout the United States, throughout the country. And you guys are hopefully trying to eradicate the death penalty for Connecticut. Tell me, what started the whole organization, the Connecticut to Network Abolishing Death Penalty? What really started that? Was it some kind of specific incident that happened, or you guys knew somebody that was on death row? And I mean, what really embarked this whole journey?
Our organization, we're 25 years old, and we started in 1986. Mm-hmm. I was a year old at the time, so didn't play much of a role in starting the organization. I think what happened in the United States was the Supreme Court had abolished the death penalty in 1972, mm-hmm. and then brought it back in 1976. And you saw a lot of a push to be tough on crime.
Right.
And I think there was a lot of reaction across the states that we're not being tough on crime, we need to be smart on crime. And governors, legislatures were pushing to bring the death penalty back, and it was not an effective system. It was putting innocent lives at risk. It was not reducing crime. And a lot of groups got together in different states and said, we need to fight this. We need to repeal it here in our state. Mm-hmm. And it's been successful. Here in Connecticut, we're right on the edge of being able to repeal the death penalty. But in other states, they have had success.
Right.
4 states in the past decade have repealed the death penalty. Right. And just this past week, the governor in Oregon declared a moratorium on executions. So there's this really strong movement across the country to get rid of the system, and we hope that Connecticut's the next state to go.
Now, what kind of statistics or research or evidence you guys have to support the abolishment of the death penalty, and it's strictly to the local lower prisons and costs and reductions?
Well, most importantly, there's a lot of reasons why we oppose the death penalty, but it's very important. You talk about statistically the fact that there is no real evidence that the death penalty is a deterrent to crime and to murder especially. Furthermore, the death penalty is extraordinarily expensive, much more expensive than life imprisonment. And this has been found. There have been several different studies in different states, and all of them have found the same thing. And really, everybody who is knowledgeable, even folks who are pro-death penalty are knowledgeable, acknowledge that the death penalty is significantly more expensive than the alternative of life imprisonment without parole.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking, Ben was...
And what we find is that, there's this alternative where people stay locked up, society stays secure, and people respond positively to that. Mm-hmm. A lot of times, people throw around poll numbers about the death penalty and say, well, a majority of Americans favor capital punishment. Mm-hmm. But what you find is that when you give people the alternative of life in prison without release to the death penalty, support for the death penalty drops dramatically. The country is split. So, and in fact, support for the death penalty has dropped to its lowest levels in decades.
Right.
And I think that's in large part due to the execution of Troy Davis, which gained national attention. Right. And we can certainly go into that in more detail.
As well as other cases where innocent people have been executed. The case of Cameron Todd Willingham down in Texas, where it is more or less scientifically proven that they executed somebody who was innocent. Right. And so people look at, Americans have seen a broken system, and when they have seen this broken system and, and understand the alternative, life without parole, they have, really started to favor that alternative.
And I
have DNA, and now it's impossible to send an innocent person to prison or to death row. And that's just not the reality. One thing you have to remember is that in only 10%, about 10% of murder cases, there is DNA evidence. So vast majority of cases, you don't have DNA, you're working off of, eyewitness testimony, evidence that has been shown to be faulty in many cases. So DNA is not the answer. Plus, even in cases where there is DNA, there was just a New York Times article that came out a week or two ago about prosecutors fighting to protect convictions even when there's compelling DNA evidence that someone is innocent. So there are these cases like where there may be a rape and a murder.
Right.
And rape cases are cases where there is DNA evidence a lot of the time, and they get the DNA evidence, they test it, might be 15, 20 years after the fact,
Right.
and they find out the DNA does not match the person who was convicted, and then the prosecutors say, oh, well, the woman could have had sex with someone else, and then the guy came and killed her. And they just make these these arguments that are not compelling at all. And the only reason they're doing it is because they don't want to admit that they're wrong.
Right.
And that's the problem with the death penalty.
And that
just this past week, featuring Kim Davis, who's the sister of Troy Davis, who was executed, and also on the panel was Representative Gary Holder Winfield. And he's been the lead champion for repeal in the legislature, done a tremendous job advancing this legislation. He said 2012 is going to be the year. And so we're really trying to mobilize the community, having people contact their legislators, let them know that we can't delay any longer. This system needs to go.
Do you think if this time it doesn't go around, it probably won't ever happen for the state? Are you guys at that point now?
we're going to win this year, but we really need the support of the folks who are out there watching this program to really contact their state senators and tell them that they want the death penalty to be abolished in Connecticut.
That you have the people that says they believe that the DNA is the golden glove. What about the people that say you can't put a price on justice? So if somebody kills somebody and you guys want to keep them alive in prison for the rest of their life, people are saying, well, we're paying our tax money to keep him alive. What do you say about that?
Well, life in prison.
Because we're the ones who are
right.
paying.
Life in prison is expensive, but it's far less expensive than the death penalty. And the simplest reason for that is that lawyers are more expensive than prison guards. And so when prosecutors say we want to seek the death penalty, it sets in motion a very costly and drawn-out process. So there'll be extra lawyers involved, extra investigators. When you get to the trial itself, there's a whole separate sentencing phase of the trial. And so the most in-depth study was done in Maryland, and they found that on average it cost $1.9 million more for capital felony cases compared to cases where prosecutors seek just life in prison without release, violence. And
especially in this city, New Haven.
Exactly, and murders have been going up, and we need to reduce.
Understand.
We need to reduce crime, and what you find is that one of the easiest ways to do that is putting more cops on the street. And imagine the $4 million, which is the estimate of how much we waste a year on the death penalty, put that into community policing or services towards victims' family members. I think there's a lot of things that money could go towards, which is much more effective, helps the community, than a death penalty that's on the books that we rarely use.
Well, you were going to say something.
Fully agree, Stephanie. We really need to spend that money on more police and more services for homicide victims that really need it, rather than on the death penalty.
I want to ask you both a personal question. Have you ever encountered any of your loved ones or spouse or partner being killed by somebody?
I am lucky enough that I have not had a close family member, murder victims. But
do you believe if you have, God forbid, if that did happen, would your mind be different? Or what do you think it would be the same? It would be just as strong as your
actually,
argument?
it would be even stronger.
Okay.
I don't want, I have a wife and kid, and Ben, he has a fiance and family, whatever. And I would not want my legacy or my wife's legacy or my kid's legacy to be an executed person, to be another dead person. I want our legacies to be, life affirming, to really about the community, about all the things that we care about love, about, you know, family. And I would never want my final legacy to end in somebody else's death, somebody else's family's pain. I mean, that's not what I'm about. That's not what my wife's about. That's not what my family's about. And so I think that for me personally, you know, I would never, and my wife knows this, you know, would never want, you know, God forbid anything were to happen to me or to my wife, we would not want, you know, that person to be killed and executed for it, because that's not what we want our lives to be about.
And what about you, Ben? Have you faced an accident
I've been blessed that I haven't had any close family members murdered.
But if you had, God, would your mind be kind of different or not really?
Well, in this work, we've worked with a lot of victims' family members.
Right.
We actually there have been over 100 murder victims' family members in Connecticut who have come out in favor of repeal, and we've worked very closely with them. And I admire them a great deal. And I think from working with them, honestly, I don't know exactly how I'd feel. Like if my fiance was murdered, I bet after it happened, I'd be filled with rage. But I guess what I would want, and this is a story out of Montana, prosecutor came in with the family and said, you know, I know you are angry and that you want this person to die. But he took this big pile of papers and set it on the desk and said, do you really want to go through that? And that's what they would go through, years and years of endless appeals and trials, going through a capital case. And he's like, you don't want that. That's not going to help you. It's just going to tear your family apart and put you through more pain. And I hope if I were in that situation, I don't know how I'd feel, but I hope someone would be able to level with me and tell me how the process is really going to be and say this is not the path you want to go down.